Welcome! In this section we'll explain how to display and change the SELinux mode of a server, both persistently and temporarily. So let's get started. The file that defines how SELinux is configured at boot time is etc SELinux config. There are two shell variables defined in this file that configure SELinux persistently: SELinux and SELinux type. SELinux is the default mode. It can be set to enforcing, permissive, or disabled. To enable or disable SELinux requires changing the SELinux variable in this file and rebooting the system. The other variable, SELinux type, defines the default SELinux policy that is used. The default policy used by Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the targeted policy, which uses context types to restrict network services. In earlier versions of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, this file was located at etc sysconfig SELinux. In RHEL 7, this is a symbolic link to etc SELinux config. The getenforce command is used to display the current SELinux mode. Currently, my system has SELinux in permissive mode. Use the setenforce command to change the current SELinux mode when SELinux is enabled. So setenforce 1 sets enforcing to be active. So at this point, I should see that my system is in enforcing mode. I can also specify setenforce with the word permissive or enforcing to set the mode that way as well. Any changes made by the setenforce command are temporary and will revert to the default settings in etc SELinux config at the next reboot. Setenforce can only change the SELinux mode to enforcing and permissive mode. It cannot disable SELinux. One other way to temporarily set the SELinux mode of a system is to pass the kernel a parameter at boot time. There are two kernel parameters that affect SELinux operation on a system: SELinux and enforcing. Both of these parameters can be assigned a 0 or a 1. Additional grub stanzas can be created, and these parameters can be added to the end of the kernel line. For example, this kernel line here. Or they can be added at the end of the kernel line at boot time. SELinux equals 0 disables SELinux entirely. SELinux equal 1 enables it. Realize that the system will reassign SELinux context labels to every file on the system if SELinux is disabled, then re-enabled. This can be a very time-consuming process. Enforcing equals 0 brings the system up in permissive mode. Enforcing equal 1 brings it up in enforcing mode. Specifying kernel arguments overrides the settings in etc SELinux config. In this video, we showed you how to display and modify the SELinux mode of your system. We introduced you to the getenforce and setenforce commands, and we also looked at how to configure SELinux with the etc SELinux config file, and also the SELinux and enforcing kernel parameters.